Knightly Tales, Book 1, by Jeff Silvers. Dedicated to Christy, who was my inspiration, you little mischievous elf. Prologue. The blazing fire created welcome warmth against the chill of the early winter's night air just outside the walls of the home where my companions and I now gathered. Its wavering glow and the slight odor of burning wood filled the great room with a comfortable, soothing atmosphere. The modest home in which we assembled belonged to Darmir, the wisest of all men in the known lands. My friends and I would gather here every fortnight when Darmir hosted an evening of storytelling to us, the children of the nobles of the Shire of Raylan. I visited him more often for, as my father would say, one should learn from those who are the most wise. Since I was old enough to walk, Darmir was my mentor and teacher. Even so, his presence and wisdom always amazed me. Though most of my companions knew him only as a wise man and storyteller, I knew him to be the staunchest ally and savior of our shire in the years to come. Such times were still many years in the future, and must wait for later telling. Presently, my companions and I gathered for good fellowship and to hear Darmir's tales. His stories contain wisdom about the struggles of life and death, things natural and not so natural, and all that's in between. Such tales were told with the knowing fact of actual exploits, from adventures so far from the commonplace as to make one think they were but fantasy. Such they were not. A few were purely storytellers' yarns, but many, though fantastic as they sounded, were true events. It seemed these endeavors of true heroes battling against evil and injustice, or of fate going hand in hand with justice to mete out proper ends to wrongdoers, no longer abound in our modern world, except in the fanciful stories and dreams of those with imagination and a lust for adventure. While I oft thought that a sad fact, for even in our peaceful lands, heroes of renown would be greatly welcome, I then remembered a piece of advice Darmir passed me some years earlier. Good and evil are two faces of the same coin, he said. One cannot have one without an equal in the other. I suppose if that were true, I was thankful for the more common heroes who inhabited our smaller corner of the world, for such meant we had only the more common forms of evildoers as well. As my friends settled on the thickly furred cushions on the floor before Darmir's chair, my attention traveled among the various odds and ends scattered about, flickering in the reflected yellow glow of the crackling blaze. Though neither my companions nor I were strangers here, Darmir's various items were of constant interest to me. Each time I entered his home, I swore my eyes locked on to a new object in the vast collection that I had not seen before. I oft wondered what stories such things could tell if they could but speak, and I wondered if the tales of how and where he came upon those items were as interesting as their stories of origin. While the items varied from the ordinary to the unknown, at times the ordinary seemed anything but when it came to Darmir's collection. What, pray tell, was the story behind the badly damaged metal shield hanging by the large bookcase that contained much of his collection? The thick shield was dull gray, with minor scrawl work upon the surface. There was no standard or colors to indicate a house or family line from whence its owner belonged. It did, however, have 3 ragged tears that left empty space where metal should have been, extending from the upper right edge to barely near the center. It was as if some giant claw ripped into it, trying to reach the owner, and the strong steel was no more hindrance than a sheet of parchment. I knew not what manner of creature could have done such. I have witnessed shields penetrated by lance, dented by blows from mace and battle axe, but pierced and torn as one would tear parchment. I wondered what such beast might do to plate armor, and decided immediately that I would not wish to actually be in the position of seeing that, for I had serious doubts concerning the well-being of an armored man in such a contest. Above the blazing fire, centered squarely above the mantel, lay an immense skull with large, sharp teeth protruding from the jaws. It was obviously from a great meat-eating animal, perhaps one of the extremely rare dragons that some say still inhabited our world in the distant corners of mountainous regions, but I, in truth, knew not. Aside from the size and fearsome teeth, my interest focused on the half-buried arrow shaft protruding from the center of the skull. The unseen arrowhead was buried between and just above the eye sockets. It must have been a brave hunter indeed to claim that prize, if the skull was any indication of the beast's ferocity. Various old, sometimes odd, weapons were mounted on walls or stood in corners. Spears, axes, swords, maces, a halberd, lance tips, and oddly shaped bladed weapons, one of which Darmir told me was a sword designed for throwing. There were 2 wooden clubs, one lined with small, very sharp teeth from a type of fish Darmir called a shark, while the other had multiple triangle blades made of a black glassy mineral, far sharper than any steel blade that I knew. Statues and ornaments sat on bookcase shelves or hung displayed on the surrounding walls. Some were worth a small fortune, as they were obviously crafted with skilled hands, especially the gossamer depiction of a beautiful, pointed-eared woman in a silver frame. Closer inspection showed that the smiling likeness was woven of small fibers like silk from a spider. When turned to the light in a certain way, they had a golden hue, as if made from the thinnest gold thread. It would take days to list everything the house contained, not only because of their number, but also in the effort to find words to describe them. I oft mused that should one take down the walls of Darmir's home, what was left would resemble a market bazaar from some distant exotic land. In the midst of that collection sat our host, Darmir. His wrinkled, bearded face not only shone with the same firelight colors as the room, but also with a brighter foliage of knowledge and wisdom from his countless experiences. The white-haired man was far older than anyone can guess, not that some people did not try, myself included. In trying to determine Darmir's age, I asked my father about him, and was told that he had known Darmir when he was but a small boy. At the time I asked, my father was over 45 seasons. Many people in Raylan are far older than my father, and they too knew Darmir in their younger years. One, such as Leonis the blacksmith, who had seen 70 years. He remembered Darmir from his childhood, as did others of his age. From all those I talked to, Darmir must have been far over 100 years old. But that was impossible. He seemed no more than 60 seasons, though he had the fire and energy of one half that. No matter who I spoke to, none knew from whence Darmir came, nor exactly when he arrived to our township of Raylan. Regardless of the mystery surrounding him, it was well known that he was the wisest man in the known region, and many from Raylan and farther away came to seek his counsel. Such information ranged from battle strategies, of which I learned from him myself, to less serious matters. To my knowledge, no one who received his counsel ever regretted it. Darmir never spoke of his past, though it was obvious his life had been long and varied. Upon meeting him, one could say only that he was well educated, knew the knightly mannerisms, was warm and kind, and greeted friends and strangers with a smile and an open hand. However, he could be quite stern. It was well known that he had little patience for those who were slothful and dishonorable, and he shied away from pomp and circumstance at formal gatherings. In those things he acted more like a hermit, disdaining festive gatherings. For my part in knowing him, it seemed as though some sadness gripped his heart, and happy gatherings only reminded him of some past loss or pain, so he chose to refrain from joining such merriment. Still, he did not mind small gatherings of close friends, especially us. Darmir taught my companions and me natural philosophy, history, and more. On nights such as this one, however, he stepped back from the more formal role of teacher to become that of a storyteller. Even in his entertaining tales, there were various bits of wisdom that became part of our philosophy of life and helped mold our spirits and actions into the proper courses. Some stories were tales from his past adventures, while others were make-believe. We were never quite certain which was which, because Darmer seldom knew. Not because he possessed a befuddled mind, but rather he was so filled with the knowledge of myths from many lands and times, information about a wide variety of topics, and of actual fantastic adventures, that the two oft overlapped. At least I oft hoped some tales were composed more of myth than reality. This was one such night when he would tell a tale to entertain us. My friends and I enjoyed such nights. We sat before that wise man on soft fur-covered pallets, while he sat before us in his rocker, the fire blazing behind him on cool nights. Sometimes he chose the topic. Other times he asked us if there was a recent event he might relate to one of his tales. At other times one of us chose an object from his collection for him to expound upon. Regardless of the source, we never left that house without being entertained and learning something new. After my friends and I accepted Darmer's more than ample hospitality and availed ourselves of the various refreshments, the knight's tale was ready. As was his custom, he drew for himself a tankard of strong dark ale and sat in front of the blazing hearth, outreaching warmth. I oft wondered why he drew the tankard. In all my visits he never once put his lip to the rim, even though the tankard sat within reach on a nearby table. The oak chair creaked again as he leaned back slightly, burrowing into his fur cloak for warmth, before informing us that we would hear a grand story that night, one that had yet to truly end. Likely one that never began, I thought humorously. This tale, my young friends, occurred some time ago in a land far from the Shire of Rayland, and yet is always near. It's a tale of magic and monsters, wonder and horror, and great loss and deep love. The story began when high adventure was most sought, and the tales of heroes filled the songs of minstrels in all the shires. Such was a time when mere farmers could become warriors, warriors could become kings, and kings could be reduced to farmers. Thus began Darmer's first nightly tale.